class. This week you were asked to look at the second part or the final part of Chapter 6, the Comparing Strings section. And this is your Canvas work area where you can see the assignment from Chapter 6 and the string methods list worksheet that I gave you. That looks like this, and these are I've highlighted all of the methods you needed for this week's work. Chapter 6, Comparing Strings, added everything you do to compare or test equality of strings, including the index of to locate a position of a specific string, starting with and ending with. And we didn't do the lab that followed this, but then we jumped to the end of the chapter and did exercise 19. So I asked you to read through the string methods, pay close attention to what they do, and highlighted specific things to look at. In part 2, I did ask you to look at word guess and how some of the concepts were implemented within the word guess code. And then in part 3, I asked you to code exercise 19, and it was a very simple create and remove string application that prompts the user for a sentence in a string, and then remove every occurrence of the string from the sentence. So you had to actually type in a word that was within the initial sentence. Gave you some steps to follow, prompt the user for the sentence, find a word, and then remove every occurrence. And the key word here was probably every, because it told you that you needed to take out every occurrence of the same word. And many of you didn't catch that concept and you got close on your code. So let's look at where we started. We had a remove string class. We had two variables, sentence and string to remove. Now when I give you code like this, you do not need to add any more variables unless you're writing methods like in this coming week's exercise. So this week there was no new variables to add. They're already there. So you need to work with these existing variables to create your next two lines of code. Now, you've identified the string to remove by capturing the sentence from the user and then the string to remove from the user as well. Now you have to remove a word by replacing it with nothing, which I kind of gave you notes on that if you followed through and read the Q&As. And then you just had to print the revised sentence. Notice sentence is one of your variables. Well, as you should have learned in the prior chapter, strings are immutable, but you can create a copy of it, just like we have a string here called text. Text equals hello. Change text to lowercase. There's now two versions of text, an original case and a lowercase version of it. But every reference to text after this command is now going to look at the new version in memory. And so the same thing was to happen with sentence in this computer lab or this programming lab, is you would reuse the word sentence and replace all of the strings to remove with a blank, and then you would print out the sentence again. So what happens is we finish up your code by adding two new lines. The first one is the sentence. Again, we're creating a new instance in memory of sentence. We're replacing all because it said every occurrence, which I pointed out a minute ago. And then we had to pick our string to remove, which is what the user entered as a variable here, and replace it with a blank. And I told you within the descriptions that I provided and the hints I provided that this was how to do this. Remember, you guys got to continue to come back to Canvas and look at what other users have asked and any hints that I've added. Next, you need to output the sentence. Well, that was real easy. When you print a string, you just literally put the variable and whatever it was, print it out. And so these also included the answers to the output or the output lines that you needed for the quiz that we did, quiz 1. And what happened is in grading, if it had spaces here and spaces here and spaces here, and you didn't put them in, well, initially it marked it wrong. Well, I finally figured out what was wrong with Canvas, and I had to manually correct a lot of quizzes. Some of you didn't have spaces, some of you did have spaces, and so I had to go back into each of your quizzes and regrade them to see if you included the sentences. Some of you just kind of blew it. You didn't put things in the right place, tried to put string to remove here. Well, that's not going to work. It has to be sentence, and what you have to print out is sentence, not the string to remove. So I saw a lot of variations. I tried to be generous in grading, but some of you just really missed it. So let's move on to the next lab. Count vowels. Now, I gave you everything but the last few lines of code. Count the number of vowels, A, E, I, O, and U. When the letter that you look at equals A, E, I, O, U, add 1 to a counter. So you're going to make everything lowercase as one of your first steps. Use a for loop that uses the length of the sentence as a control. So there's a hint on one of the methods you're going to use. A substring method, another substring method you're going to use. So look at each letter, I minus 1 and I. If you look at how substring works, and I explained this again in one of the Q&As, and I'm encouraging you guys to ask me questions in the Q&A. If we look at how substring works in our comparing strings PDF, substring says, let's look at the start position and an end position. But if you look at the definition, it ends one character before the end position. So we need to look at, if using a for loop, we need to do it just like I described. I minus 1, so I must start at 1, and comma I, so it doesn't look at the position after it. So this gives me the ability to look at a single letter and test it for A, E, I, O, U. Increment the counter if the letter equals the value. Equals, we have a dot equals in our worksheet. We have a dot equals, so we're testing the string to equal to A or B or C, or I'm sorry, A, E, I, O, U. And I actually hinted and gave you the code for that right here. So this started your Boolean comparison of your program. I give you A, E, and then you just had to have IOU to this line. I started the code for you and told you what to do next, basically in the hints. So let's wrap up this code by actually checking the code version here on count vowels. So in count vowels, again, I gave you the starter code up through here. Now, convert to lowercase for equality is the first thing I told you to do. So just take lowercase text that the user enters, or I'm sorry, take the text that the user enters, and in this case, we need to store it as lowercase text. I gave you the variable. Don't add extraneous variables. Now we're going to use that lowercase text and its length as the control point for a for loop because we have to look at every letter in the for loop. But we need to start I at 1 because of how I explained your substring method works. So to look at position 0, we have to use I minus 1 up through position I, which will let substring then look at position 0. Sorry, I meant to go to the code. So I equals 1, I to lowercase text length, I plus plus each time through the loop. Now, as I commented here, letter to test comes from the substring, which is a single character because we are setting the letter variable. Here's where we're using the new string letter. Don't add variables, use what I give you. Set it to the lowercase text dot substring I minus 1 I. So each time through the loop, we're going to get the next letter in the count because I is incrementing, so we'll always get the next letter each time through the loop. Test each letter, letter.equals, and here's where I got you started with this line of code. Of course, it goes all the way out. I kept it on one line, A-E-I-O-U. Letter.equals each time has to be spelled completely out. You can't just have or I or O or U. You have to use the method the variable dot method dot with its comparison each time. Add one so that when the if evaluates to true, you add one to vowel sum, and in the end, you print the number of vowels and vowel sum. So again, I encourage you guys look back through the strings handout. We use the length method, we use the substring method, we use two lowercase. The first lab we did used replace all because it was replace everything. We replaced it with a empty space using double quotes. We used the equals method in the second lab, and this worksheet was something you're supposed to keep available while you took the matching quiz, and you should have been able to get every one of those right. Plus, I gave you 2 tries on the quiz. So I hope the week went well for you. This coming week, we're going to do some work on methods where you start adding extra methods. Be sure to do the reading carefully as I've instructed, and I'll be getting back to you with a little bit more information later in the week on that method. And it's a short week. You only got through Thursday. Friday's a holiday. So have a blessed Easter weekend, and I'll be in touch.